your comments in regards to what's going on in Europe over free speech laws and hate speech laws that are trying to curtail criticisms of religious faith and expression.
Oh yeah, but you want to go first? He lives in Europe.
Yes, there's a lot of. I know of another incident which took place in northern England a few years ago, where a Girl Guide leader was attacked on her way into a church by apparently Muslim youths throwing quite large stones at her and shouting "Christian bitch." These things do happen. No-go areas is, I think, something of an exaggeration. There are, particularly in parts of northern England and in London, solitudes. So you have people living side by side who have nothing whatever to do with each other. In Bradford in particular, large numbers of people whose families originate from Pakistan and who are Muslim live in the same city as it's the people whose families have lived there for centuries. And they don't really, they'll speak to each other on a bus or in a shop or in a place of business, but they would never go into each other's homes or have any other kind of commerce. That has definitely happened, and there are Muslim areas in which large, elaborate mosques have sprung up, usually on high ground, to demonstrate a position of supremacy, and where the churches are more or less empty. And in terms of what you can say about it, there is obviously a great limit because of partly because of the fact that Muslims, though not entirely, but most Muslims in Britain are Asians, and therefore the issue of racial bigotry comes in at the same time, and people feel very restrained about what they can say for fear of being accused of racial bigotry when what they're actually addressing is something different. In the rest of continental Europe, particularly in the Netherlands and in Belgium, but also in parts of France, particularly Strasbourg, northern Italy and large parts of Germany where there's a very big Turkish population, there is a large and growing Muslim population which is making a greater and greater impact on the way in which people live and penetrating the sky with more and more minarets. And it's, in my view, if people are worried about the Islamization of Western civilization, this seems to me to be a much more serious part of it than the frankly pumped up and overplayed wild panic talk about terrorism which we get all the time from our government.
Oh yeah, my concern is over the right to criticize religion and not to for example, we have this the resurrection of the whole Danish cartoon debate and protest that's going on after what was it? Intelligence indicated that these cartoons that there was an assassination plot on one of these cartoons, and so they republished that. These debates are brewing up, and I often see hostility towards the people who are writing the cartoons and publishing in solidarity.
Well, I can help you out there. Fleming Rose, the editor of the Jutland Post, who commissioned and published those cartoons and gave his reasons why he thought it was time to do it, is a friend of mine and is one of the many friends I now have, not all of them European, some of them, who have to live under police protection now. And not because of any imagined terrorist threat, I might add, but or any hyped or fabricated one, because of a very, very direct one, a threat of violence to their own persons and the magazines and other outlets of information and opinion that they work for and with. And I was the one who organised the demonstration in front of the Danish embassy in Washington, thinking it was about time the Danes saw at least a friendly crowd outside one of their embassies, just one day, made up of people who were not mainly motivated by hatred and violence. That's presumably why I'd have to tell you about the demonstration. It didn't get any coverage because it didn't threaten violence or practice hatred. The entire American media, with the exception of the Weekly Standard and a magazine I write for myself occasionally, well actually regularly, Free Inquiry, refused to publish as a news item the pictures that were in contention. In other words, people were told there's a fight about some images. In the age of the image, the completely image-dominated period of media existence, the images themselves were not deemed to be fit for showing. Now, come on, everybody knows what's going on here. And self-censorship is probably the very least of it. Anyway, or it would be if there wasn't actual censorship, or in other words, if the copies of our little magazine had not been pulled from the shelves of Gordas Books. Gordas Books says, you reprint those sketches, we are not going to let you sell them elsewhere. So I will never do another reading in Gordas Books. Small thing, Department of Empty Threats, just I won't, okay, and they know why. But to tell you this is in a sense to tell you some news, because I can't tell you the people who gave in because of threats, because telling you that would be telling you things that could be of use to those who are bringing the threats of physical force. So it's a very neatly wrapped up capitulation of a whole culture crying before it's heard, when there actually is no threat that we could not, with ordinary pugnacity, just resist and say we won't be spoken to in this tone of voice. Surrenders prearranged and done in advance, without anyone being consulted. No reader, no voter has been even asked what they think about it, whether they would themselves accept a microscopic risk to defend the First Amendment and the values that underpin it. This, I think, is a really gruesome state of affairs.
How does, because people would argue that these images, because they are intolerant and because they are bigoted, that's why
so that's not what they argue. They don't argue that at all. I've never heard that argued. It was made very plain to me. I live in Washington, it's my hometown, Washington, D.C., nation's capital. I know a lot of the people who are responsible for making these editorial decisions in newspapers, magazines, and television stations. And I know why they made it. So it was out of fear. Simple. They didn't say, we don't want to say something intolerant about Islam. It says, we can't stand the heat that we think might result. So they're anticipating. It's known in playground terms as crying before you've been heard.
So in your view, this isn't misguided?
It is nothing, no, it is bodyguarded by a soggy multiculturalism. It says that the only kind of any variety, any diversity is to be defended, except the one that insists upon diversity. In other words, it redefines diversity as uniformity. If I say the First Amendment and its rights include the right to be offensive to religious fanatics, you're just the one group that isn't quite covered by our wonderful, gorgeous mosaic of diversity and tolerance. I see, I understand, I get it completely. Why then, that's fine, just don't call it diversity anymore. Call it uniformity and live with it. I think I have the right to insist on that.
The fear is not completely baseless, though, because
damn straight it's not baseless. I know people who really do have to live under.
Yeah, well, but most of us remember Theo van Gogh, who was murdered in an Amsterdam street.
Actually, ritually murdered, disemboweled, subjected to a ritualized religious killing, as of a sheep or an animal. And his collaborator, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's a very close friend of mine, now has to live under complete protection. So does Fleming Rose, the editor of the Jutland Post. So for a very long time did my friend Salman Rushdie for the crime of writing a novel. No, there's no question that this is a serious threat. But then where is the intolerance coming from? When those who say that the intolerance comes from those of us who resist and satirize this are preparing in full view, not a murder, but a suicide.
So other than fear in the Islamic case, when we look at this as a broader phenomena, what do you think accounts for the double standard in how we treat criticism of somebody's religious views as opposed to criticism of somebody's philosophical, political views outside of the realm where we consider them sacred? Or I'm just looking for a way to draw this into.
I still think it's the fear of being accused of racial bigotry,
okay,
which is the ultimate thought crime if you commit that, then you're obviously flung out of the comity of civilized people, so that's the end. And people are very scared of that. And given the simple truth that large numbers of Muslims in Western countries do come from Asia, it's a very easy accusation to have made against you, and it's one people do fear.
It's a very easy one to defuse, though, that, I think. And incidentally, I don't think racism is a thought crime. The preaching of racial hatred is offence if it's not a crime.
Well, hang on. Should it be a criminal offence?
No, but I mean, no, it is. And is, you know, I didn't say it should be a criminal offence.
I mean, I always thought that the race relations laws in
it's not what people are thinking.
In Britain in the 60s were actually justified because they ended the posting of notices in boarding houses saying no blacks and a number of other rather disgraceful things. So I'm ambiguous about that, but it is. In terms of how we order our society, is something you cannot do, and it's something you can't think. The fact that whether that doesn't to call something a thought crime doesn't necessarily dignify it as something which you ought to think.
No, indeed, but it's an utterance question. And when I say it's an offence, I mean it's an offence. It's an offence to me, not an offence to the law. But it can have criminal implications with it. But generally, I think everything should be both thinkable and sayable. And that principle matters more to me than the feelings of anyone who might be hurt by any violation of it. But it should be noticed that again, speaking about the country I know best in Europe, my country of birth, the warnings of what was coming by way of Islamist intolerance, by the way of the importing into Great Britain of communities from the extremely backward and feudal and underdeveloped parts of North Africa and Pakistan. People who were arranged marriages to cousins down the generations, and the terrible consequences such as deformed births that come from our second nature. People like Nadim Aslam, for example, who's written this wonderful book about the Yorkshire Muslim community called Maps for Lost Lovers.